G'day, it's Professor Joseph Drew here. This video follows on from my earlier videos where I looked at the fiscal outcomes from the New South Wales 2016 forced amalgamations, and then there was a subsequent video where I looked at why amalgamations often disappoint in a generic sense. This particular video looks at why rural local government amalgamations often disappoint. And the problem is, to put it in a nutshell, most of our public policy architects are sitting in capital cities. They don't live rural. They don't understand what life is like in rural Australia. As you'll notice from my clothing, my picture on the front of the YouTube channel, I'm a rural bloke. I have a small farm 30 k's north of Tamworth, which is about 400 kilometres northwest of Sydney. Indeed, the picture that you see all the time on my YouTube channel is me in my back paddock. I'm proudly rural. I care about rural local government. Indeed, I spend a lot of my time helping rural local governments because they're the ones that need most help, who receive the least help, and who have special challenges that commercial consultants based in Sydney and Canberra and Melbourne just don't understand. So first of all, for my listeners listening in metropolitan areas, I need to go through what makes local government in rural areas different and special. First of all, local government in rural areas usually has a much larger and very different remit. It's not so much about discretionary services, it's about needs, providing needs that business or government at higher tiers have failed to provide. So local governments will often do things like running aged care centres and child care centres and the aerodrome and the sale yards and a water and sewer business where the jurisdiction allows. Indeed, local government is often the provider of last resort. When business won't come in because there's not enough scale to make a profit, local government needs to step in. That's why you have local governments running aged care centres in rural areas, because it's just not profitable for corporations and NGOs to move into those rural areas. So if local government doesn't do it, it just won't happen. But also, local government areas are often neglected by higher tiers of government, the state government and the federal government. Where I live in Moonbi, there's no federal services, there's no state services, and I probably don't expect them realistically. We're a long way from Sydney. However, there are local government services, and if local government wasn't picking up the slack, doing the things that metropolitan people take for granted that state governments and federal governments do, well then we'd be in a real mess. So people in rural areas really value their local government because their local government is the provider of last resort. When everyone else neglects us or ignores us, local government looks after us. It's also often the employer of choice. In rural areas, the wages are much, much lower than metropolitan areas. If you look at the ABS statistics, up to 10, 15 grand a year, the average wages are lower than metropolitan areas. So it's a nice, stable job. It's a relatively well-paying job, and generally it's a secure job until someone in a city has a brain bubble about doing amalgamations that won't work. Also, it's important to understand that rural communities are quite heterogeneous. That means they're very different. My colleagues in the city think that all rural councils are the same. We're all local yokels. Nothing could be further from the truth. Where I live is cattle country and light industry in Tamworth. North of us is Uralla. That's merino wool, fine wool. And it's also a lot of people that live in Uralla work at the University of New England, which is only 30 k's up the road. Southwest of me is Gunnedah. It's all about coal mining and large-scale crop farming. Very different communities with very different activities, and that changes the needs of the community. It also changes the capacity of the community to contribute towards the common good. And finally, rural communities are incredibly loyal for all the reasons I've already outlined. And you've got to have a really convincing argument to sell an amalgamation to a rural local government. That explains why the far majority of the amalgamations in Australia have actually happened in rural communities, and some of them have happened well over a decade after the amalgamation. Rural people need their local government, and they don't forget when they feel they've been treated poorly, and they'll continue to activate until their community gets what they need. Now, the main reasons why rural local government amalgamations don't work are very similar to why city ones don't work, the main reason. But then we've got an extra level of challenges. So let's start at a little bit of revision from my earlier video. We just don't do our homework. We don't do the empirical work. We don't look at the cultures. We don't go out to the places. We don't see whether there's complementarities in the organisational culture and if the IT systems are equivalent or able to talk to each other or things like that. It's just someone randomly pointing at maps with no empirical analysis or thought or anything behind it at all. And it's not a surprise, a disaster. So that's one reason why rural amalgamations are a disaster. Same lack of homework. Same problem with experts who aren't experts at all. They're just quacks. They're self-professed experts. They run around saying what an expert they are. Some of them even have academic titles. But they have no record of expertise that they can point at. You can look at my Google Scholar page and find the 75 publications peer-reviewed by the best people in the world and the best journals in the world. And you can see that people agree that I can do some things. These self-professed experts, you've got no way of verifying that they know what they claim they know. And from the disasters that we've had in Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, and hopefully not, but I'm worried that it could be in Western Australia soon, it's pretty clear that these experts have no expertise. And they particularly don't have rural expertise. As I said before, unless you're a country person, unless you live in a rural area, you don't get it. You're not going to understand what it's like not to get your rubbish bin picked up. You're not going to understand what it's like to be ignored by other tiers of government or by business and have to rely on local government for the most basic things. Things that we, as a nation, provide money to supply for third world nations. Unless you live in a rural area, you just won't understand it. You can't learn it. You've got to live here in the country. And the experts just fail to know communities. They fail to get to know them. I swear most of these so-called experts don't even go out to visit the councils that they decide they're going to amalgamate in rural areas. The Boundary Commission was a little bit fast. They turned up for a day or two to allow people to speak for 3 minutes each, and from that decide what the desires and needs and aspirations of the community were based on a couple 3-minute talks. It's just a joke. You've got to spend real time in the community and get to know the people. And despite the fact that I'm a country man and a farmer, I wouldn't profess to know how another community worked a couple 100 kilometres away. I'd have to go out there and spend some time. But I have more chance of understanding it than someone from Sydney or Canberra or Brisbane or Melbourne ever would. But there's specific rural issues that make rural amalgamations even less likely to work than urban ones. First of all, unless they're equal numbers, because the number of councillors are based on population size, what happens is the smaller community gets disenfranchised. They might only have 4 out of the 9 councillors. Now, push comes to shove, if it comes down to numbers, they will lose, and their community will lose. Now, a lot of country councils after amalgamation try to play fair, and I believe they've all got good intentions. But votes come down to numbers, and if you haven't got the number of representatives, some of these amalgamations, you've got two councillors from one community, 1 from another, and 6 from another. Well, the town with one councillor has got no chance of being heard, have they? It's just a fact of how time works and how voting works. Rural communities often differ incredibly in taste. I tried to explain that before, talking about my neighbouring local government areas, because they've got different industries and different people. They've got different needs, got different aspirations, got different capacity to contribute to the community. And as a result, the services that each local government provides differ incredibly. Now what happens is when you stick them together, we need to harmonise those services. You're in one local government area, you should all get the same level of services. It's not unreasonable. And what happens is the service level almost always gets forced up to the highest level. And all these costs materialise that no one ever thought about. In my last video I gave lots of examples, but a common one is bin pickups. In the rural town centre parts get bin, farmers don't. They might get the bin collected, 3 bins collected once a week. Another council they get amalgamated might have had 2 bins once a fortnight. They get together and get amalgamated. Not surprisingly, everyone wants 3 bins collected once a week. All of a sudden you've doubled your costs. You more than doubled them. It's lots and lots of examples like that, and it comes down to infrastructure as well, which is why costs blow out way out. And we end up with very disappointing results, like the result in New South Wales from 2016. On average, unit costs went up over 11% on a per assessment basis on average as a direct result of the poorly thought out amalgamations. Some of the staff won't make a smooth transition. It's just a fact. The staff in rural areas are deeply committed to their communities. That's why they join the council, and they're passionate about their community. But you know what? They're probably not going to have the same level of passion for the neighbouring community. They're often rivalries. Often football rivalries, that's where they start. But they're often quite strong rivals, neighbouring communities, and they don't have that passion. And also some of these, all of a sudden they've got to work and serve these people. And they do a wonderful job of trying to do it, but the passion's not there. Rural local governments work because rural local government employees and local government councillors put in far more work than their urban peers do for the money, and that's why they get away with being ignored by higher tiers of government with grants and things like that, which I'll do a video on later. But when they're serving a new community that they're not so passionate about, they may not put in all that free overtime and effort into it. They also mightn't be able to make the transition from a little local government where they might have 20 or 30 office staff to one that formed out of an amalgamation of 2 or 3 local governments where all of a sudden there's 100 staff. They'll find that, some of them will find that transition really hard. And you know what? Local government employees in such high demands, particularly the specialists in rural areas, they'll just leave. They'll get a better job in another council. And then what you have the problem of is trying to get a replacement. It's very hard to get replacements for specialist jobs like CFO, accountants, engineers, things like that in rural local government areas. And even if you do get a replacement, they might not have that passion for the local community. They mightn't be prepared to put all that extra work in that the incumbent used to do. Even if you can get a replacement, they won't have that institutional knowledge up here in their brain. When that person leaves, that all goes with them. You know, remember what we did, Bob, 20, 30 years ago when we did such and such? Well, Bob's not there anymore. He's moved to another local government area because he couldn't cope with the amalgamated entity. And that knowledge is then lost. It's called institutional knowledge. And similarly, the councillors can't often struggle to make that transition. They're best will in the world. They really try, and I've got to hand it to these guys. But in the country, in rural areas, it's local knowledge is the currency. And they know everyone in their community, and they know how their community works. But all of a sudden, you force them to join with another community, and they know nothing about it. Most of us don't go out of our local government community. I rarely drive out of Tamworth local government area. I would never follow you how things work in Gunnedah, Urella, or Walker. And the councillors have been in the same situation. It will take many years for them to learn about the community as a whole. And it's just such a shame that people don't understand that rural local government areas are different. It's just a shame that people sitting in capital cities don't understand that they need to get off their chair and away from their laptop and actually spend some time in the community they're trying to forcibly change in order to understand how it works and whether the amalgamation can work. So that's the special challenges that rural local government amalgamations face. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.